Welcome to our weekly roundtable discussion by Law Enforcement Coaching, where each week we have unscripted conversations on relevant topics for law enforcement and our first responder community. This week, we discuss the realities of practicing a positive perspective throughout your career. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you find some useful insights and information from these discussions.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our weekly roundtable discussion. For those that are tuning in, each week we have several members of our team and sometimes some guests come on where we talk about relevant topics to law enforcement and first responders. And we just kind of have a unscripted conversation. So before we jump into the conversation, I would like to introduce some of our team. So I will start. Ken, I will throw it to you and let you introduce yourself.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Koch. I'm a retired law enforcement professional from Flagstaff, Arizona. Went on to be chief of police in Taos, New Mexico. Tried retirement the first time, moved back to Arizona. Went to work for Gunsight Academy as a firearms instructor. Then I got an opportunity to move up to Colorado and work for the police department for the University of Colorado in Boulder. Served there as an assistant chief and chief for the last 4 years on the sworn side. Tried retirement a second time, and then got an opportunity to take over as a training center manager for a regional training center here in northern Colorado, where I now serve as that training manager for basically 35 agencies in the region. Been doing that for about 4 years now, and I'm getting ready to try retirement a third time here in about 4 months.
Definitely a topic for conversation that we're going to come back to. Shauna, you can introduce yourself.
I'm Shauna Henrie. I am currently working as a civilian in law enforcement. I've been doing that for a little over 30 years. Spent probably about half my career in Washington State, the other half here in Arizona. I'm currently working in Arizona in a leadership position in the civilian side. So I work in the dispatch side.
Awesome. And Mike, you are our returning coach for our conversation. You can introduce yourself again.
Sure. Mike Lawson, retired deputy sheriff from the County of San Diego Sheriff's Department, retired March of 2023. Tried retirement for a little bit and then eventually got picked up by Chula Vista Police Department. I'm their first ever wellness coordinator. So I help employees get resources and just check in with people, and I've been doing that since the end of October this last year.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you guys all for being there. And then Chris and I, we introduce ourselves so much. So we are the founders and CEO of Law Enforcement Coaching. And if you want to know more about us, you can go to the website, check out our bios, our media. We have our introductions are out there. So I just want to jump in and have these conversations. So this week, we actually had a request of a topic to start with, and that is how to either maintain your balance or stay focused on the positive and not slide into the negative throughout your career, and not putting your happiness on hold until after retirement, but actually being happy, living kind of in the moment throughout and navigating all the challenges and the struggles and stress that comes with the job. But what kind of guidance can we give our audience of how to stay positive and stay in that positive energy and not wait until, well, when I retire, then I'll start living my life? Who's going to take that one?
I'll start. Yeah, for me, I didn't do it my whole career, but it took me, probably the last 10 years of my career where physical fitness was always been huge for me, but I just didn't always find time to do it. Paddleboarding, playing pickleball, things like that. I kind of just forgot about those, and I reintroduced those things, activities I liked, maybe like fishing or something like that. And that was game changer for me. That was my happy place. Paddleboarding in San Diego, there's tons of places to paddleboard. It's right in your backyard. So just being intentional on doing the things I love. So that's what helped me.
Well, and I think before, I know, Chris, you're getting ready to say something, but I think the hesitation on everybody is something that, here's the thing, we are all about being authentic and true, And it's easy to say, oh, just focus on the positive. But we can all immediately kind of call bullshit on that because it's not easy to do. It's going to take conscious work. It's going to take an effort on everybody's part because you guys do have one of the most demanding and stressful jobs. And that's on the sworn and the non-sworn side. You guys are all under a tremendous amount of stress. So we can go a little bit deeper into this conversation and not deliver, superficial crap to the audience, but like, what is it? Because you're not going to be positive all the time. But Chris, what were you going to say before I jumped in on my little tangent?
No, I was actually just waiting for everybody to talk. But like Shauna, you're in dispatch and you hear everything that comes in to dispatch. And everything is usually negative, right? You're not going to get somebody calling saying, hey, Shauna, I'm having the greatest day and I want you to send a patrol officer over, right? But you hear all of it, whereas me on patrol, I only hear what you tell me. So you dispatchers will kind of get rid of all the, you'll clean it up for me as a patrol officer, but you're giving me the significant stuff that I need to know. But how do you stay positive? How did you stay positive for 30 years, you said?
Yeah, it's really difficult. The culture in dispatch and law enforcement across the board is really negative. And it's not just what we deal with, it's the politics, the citizens that we have to interact with who aren't happy. It's all of it. So to stay positive, like Tami was saying, takes real intention. And I think one of the biggest benefits and one of the biggest supports for keeping positive is the coworkers. So, when you have that horrific call or that super frustrating call, having somebody that you can talk to, somebody that 100% gets it. But I think on the flip side, it's incredibly important that we don't isolate ourselves only among people in public safety. We have to keep that touchstone in reality because the world isn't 100% negative and difficult and frustrating and criminals and people in crisis. That's just a small percentage of it. But because we deal with that constantly, we start to feel like that's the whole world and it starts to really affect us. And the outlook that we have can really shift to the negative because that's what we're interacting with all the time. So I think it's ridiculously important that we have a touchstone outside of there, whether it's friends or family. Because of what we do, we tend to group together amongst ourselves because we all understand what the other one's going through, but we need to keep that foot in reality by having friends, family, associations, hobbies that are outside of the law enforcement and the public safety realm.
100%. And I really love with the perspectives because we have, Ken, who was a chief, so he can bring in that perspective. We have the dispatch, we have patrol. You guys, Chris, you've been a detective, you've done all of these different things. And then the family support system over here. So Ken, what are some of the things that you found to help navigate those challenges and to stay positive?
Yeah, and I will tell you, I've lived the side of my own personal motivation, dedication, and commitment issues, and then I've also dealt with employees who were going through those issues as well as a supervisor. And what I will tell you, first thing that came to mind with the comments that have already been made by Shauna and by Mike, we start talking about, well, all of the root cause of this negative energy is I'm burned out, right? That's the word we love to rely on. And for me, I really think it's more important that you be able to self-diagnose. Sometimes the term self-awareness is kicked around. If you can't figure out what truly is causing your problem, your issue, your disheartened attitude at work, no one else is going to fix it for you, right? And if all you've ever heard in your career is, oh, well, then you must be burned out. Burnout is a definite thing in our career field, but it is very specific if you look at what burnout truly means. I had a mentor early on in my career who was notorious for saying, if you use the word burnout with him, his immediate response was, well, to be burned out, you had to be on fire at some time, and you just ain't been doing the work. So you're not burned out. I hated that, right? But he did have a point. Burnout comes from excessive immersion in the profession, right? If you're working a full 40-hour shift, and because you're short staffed, you also have to come in and cover 2 additional shifts a week, that's going to result in burnout, right? Then if when you have your downtime, you're hanging out with your buddies on the golf course and all you're doing is talking about the bullshit that's going on at work, you're not disengaging from work. That's going to result in burnout, right? The other issue that I think most of our folks deal with more frequently is the emotional side. When you've worked that 40-hour shift, you're being called in to work an additional 2 shifts to cover short staffing. And then your supervisors, your leadership is telling you, oh, and by the way, because we've got a budget shortage, you're going to have to take trade out. And you want it overtime. That is not going to create burnout. That's a conditional impact on your mental attitude towards your commitment and your dedication to your profession. And that is a completely different issue, right? The only way to resolve burnout is to get away and disengage from what is causing the burnout. Go play golf with other people and don't talk about work. Disengage and de-escalate, right? That is not going to resolve the issue about, well, and they're telling me I got to take comp time instead of overtime, and I can never take time off anyway because we're short-staffed. That's a mental process where you have to basically come to the attitude of, I can change the things I can change, and I have to accept the things I can't, or I have to make a life decision on whether I'm going to stay here or not, right? But all of that is resolved by being able to be self-aware and actually diagnose what is truly causing my negative attitude at this point in time. And once I kind of came to that realization, I disengaged completely from burnout. I never had another problem with burnout because I knew how to fix that right away, right? And you can equate it with athletes, right? Anybody who, I was a competitive cyclist, and I got to the point where I was riding 4 or 5 hours a day sometimes, and I would never get any better. Well, it's because I was burning out on the bike. I didn't get better and faster and stronger until I quit riding the bike, right? You have to disengage on burnout, but if a cause of your negative issues is related to work environment and conditional issues, you have to find a different way to solve that. Just getting away from it is not going to solve that kind of a problem.
I love all of that. Chris, I know you have some stuff to say on that.
Yeah, no, Ken, you're right. You know, having something, and all 3 of you guys talked about having hobbies outside of work, right? Something that you can disengage from at work. You know, we do. I've heard burnout for years. We talk about burnout, but it's much more too than burnout. But where does burnout begin? Well, burnout begins in the very beginning of our career. We get overinvested in being a police officer, right? Working for law enforcement. We're stoked about it, right? And we develop this team mentality where we want to be at work all the time. We eat, sleep, and breathe being at work because we're excited. And we're very proactive. We go out there, we write tickets, we make arrests, but what's happening? We're generating more work for ourselves, right? We're going to court. And if you're brand new in this profession, you're probably going to be working weekend nights for most agencies. And when do you go to court? Do you go on your weekends at night? No, you go when you're supposed to be sleeping during the week. And so if you don't manage that and you don't recognize that you're overinvested, yes, you're going to go into burnout. And burnout is the opposite of being overinvested. You don't want to be there. You're kind of questioning, is this really my profession? Do I really want to do this? And you lose motivation. And so we have, Ken, you're right. We have to recognize it, right? We have to have that self-awareness. We are in law enforcement or any first responder. We are the best problem solvers on the planet. We can arrive on scene at the most chaotic scene, and we will solve the problem in some cases within seconds of arriving, right? Even if that means we have to neutralize somebody. Hopefully we don't have to, but sometimes we do. That's just the reality of what we do. But we will solve the problem pretty quick. The problem in law enforcement is we don't recognize we have a problem until it's too late. And when I say too late, we're already going into a lot of burnout is one case. So having that, what are we doing? What hobbies do we maintain? Mike, you had mentioned you like working out, but you didn't have time to work out. That's the number one excuse that we hear. I don't have time for hobbies. right? And we all fall into this little trap. What we used to love to do before we got into law enforcement, we put that on hold. We put that on the back burner because we're focusing on our career. And pretty soon, we don't have hobbies anymore. We don't hang out with people that we used to hang out with that are non-law enforcement related. We surround ourselves with law enforcement, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we just have to be aware. If we hang out with law enforcement off duty, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about work. Right? We're going to talk about those cases that we work during the week. And so we're not able to fully disengage. How many of you guys at the very beginning of your career took your police radio home, and on your weekends you listened to the radio traffic, right? Yeah, we all do that because it's exciting, right? And I didn't even have to go out. I could just listen to my radio all weekend, and I was totally cool with it because I was young, dumb, and I didn't know any better. But just doing that is going to make it more difficult for us to disengage from work as the years progress. So we have to be aware not to overinvest in this career. It's okay to be dedicated. It's okay to work hard. It's okay to be proactive, but just have that self-awareness that you're not getting overinvested, which could lead into burnout. Tami, do you have something?
Or Mike, were you going to say something?
Oh.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, just like Chris said, like at the beginning of your career, especially when you don't have a family or even a relationship, it's tons of overtime. You don't need much sleep. And we start getting used to that pattern, and time goes by, you start having a relationship, you start having kids, and you're still trying to live and chase that overtime, and it's a disaster. It's just we're our own worst enemies. We're always trying to just do more and more. We're trying to prove ourselves, and to what expense. And I'll admit it, like there was times where I put work first, and looking back, I wish I didn't. And it took me some years to kind of realize that. But I think we kind of all fall in that trap, like Chris said. It's just, the overtime, you get used to it. Like, let's be honest, you want to go on that trip, you want to buy that toy, whatever it is, it's that pattern. And then it's hard to break that pattern when you get used to it.
Well, and I think you made a good point too, that when you, sorry, I don't know, Shauna, were you going to say something?
I can wait till you're done.
I was just going to talk about the family component. So when you are younger and you aren't in a committed relationship, or it's not very serious, you don't have kids yet, it's easier to, go longer. It's like, when we're in our 20s too, we can go party, we can go out clubbing and show up to work the next day and be like, woohoo. And now once you hit your 40s, you have half a glass of wine and you're down for 3 days, like to recover. Things shift and change. But with the priorities, talking about the, having the hobbies and all of that stuff's great. But once you do have the significant other and the family, knowing, hey, that's your biggest priority. But a lot of times we either put it on the back burner. We kind of take it for granted, because when we get home is supposed to be our safe space. And we come in and it's just like, okay, I'm home. I can decompress. I can relax. I don't want to do anything. It's too peoply out there. I just need a break, right? The problem is when you are in that burnout, when you are in exhaustion mode, a lot of times we start isolating from the family or not stepping in to help. And that's where a lot of the relationship issues come. Because here's the thing, you could work a 12, 14-hour shift. You can be absolutely exhausted. Maybe you haven't even had a snack in 10 hours, but you all have the mentality that if you were at your driveway and there was somebody at the end that there was an accident or somebody's having a heart attack, guess what? You guys are going to go and jump right into it, and you're going to muster up that energy to go back and help. But then you don't have that. You walk into your house and you don't pull from those reserves to help your significant other or your family, or to have that disconnect from the exhaustion to say, hey, your 3-year-old's like, look, I made a macaroni thing and there's a giant mess. So again, it comes back to that self-awareness of where are your priorities and knowing what is your process. Like you're exhausted. What is your process to navigate through and not take it out on your family, or to disconnect from what our real true priorities are, if that makes sense. Shauna, what were you going to say?
I 100% agree with what you said, but I also think part of the danger that we encounter is that we take on the extras at work for our families and our significant others and those that are important to us. At one point, I looked around my team and all of them were single moms, and they were all supporting children, and they were all taking as much overtime as they could so that they could pay for athletics and new shoes and, space camp and whatever else they needed. And so in the process of trying to be everything to everybody, we can't be anything to anyone. And so I think in identifying our priorities, we also have to set those boundaries and say, hey, I've got to figure out a way that when I go home, I'm home and I'm focused on family. And that when I'm at work, I can focus on that. And I think it goes back to kind of what Ken touched on a little bit, is our scope of control. We're all helpers. We all want to fix everything. That's why we do what we do. We can't fix everything. We have to sit and actually define for ourselves what we have control over and what we don't. I think a big part of the stress and the quote burnout that I see among the people that I work with is overextending what we actually can control and getting frustrated and exhausted trying to control those things that we'll never have any ability to control. I can't control the fact that somebody drove drunk and caused an accident that killed someone. I can't control the fact that our budget is so limited, I can't hire enough people to cover all the shifts. There's things I can't control. There's things that our coworkers can't control, and identifying them and pulling in our need to control those to what we actually have some control over helps. But it starts with identifying that and actually defining what it is that our purpose is and what we're trying to do. Because I'm 100% guilty of it. I worked 80-hour weeks to support my kids, and that was 80 hours a week I wasn't home with them.
And then a lot of that, I know the parental guilt comes, especially moms. Moms are heavy. I know the dads have it too, but moms really have that, I'm not good enough. I'm not being a good enough parent and whatever. And there's that trade-off and the duality of that. I know, Chris, you learned the hard way, but how to disengage from cop mode. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, like I said, it's a self-awareness, because like Shauna, you're right. We'll take on extra responsibilities. We'll take on a lot of overtime to pay for things like our kids. The other thing, like, I think when I was brand new to this career, I was young, I was single, no kids, right? I lived alone. And so for me, I now am part of this team, right? The team player mentality happened. So what I was doing was I would take on extra responsibilities. I would volunteer. If my sergeant came in and said, hey, the next team is shorthanded, can somebody stay late? I'd raise my hand and say, I'll stay, boss. No problem. And if dispatch would call me in the middle of the night as I was sleeping on my day off, they would call me to the point where I would just automatically say, yes, I'll come in. And I'd hang up, go back to sleep, and then I'd wake myself up and be like, wait, did I dream that, or did they really call me? So I'd have to call dispatch and ask them, hey, did you call me in? And they would tell me, yes, we did. Can you still come in? Yes, I can. What's happening there? I'm becoming reliable, right? Because I'm volunteering to stay late and I'm volunteering to come in off duty, to the point where now my sergeant is coming to me first when they need somebody to stay late. It's going to be real difficult for me to say no to my boss, who I respect, right? Because I don't want to let anybody down. If dispatch calls me, our dispatchers had two lists: a list of people they can count on to come in the event of a critical incident to cover the streets, and a list of do not call because they're not going to say yes, right? I was on that list, the reliability list. So what happened? They would call me. I'd be top on the list to call. And again, because of that team player mentality, I would come in. And it became so normal that even in my sleep, I would just say yes, right? So we have to be careful. We have to create boundaries. We have to it's okay to let your boss know, hey, boss, I volunteered to stay late this many times. I've accrued this many hours. I need time to decompress. I need time to stay away. Now, if I had a family, that would be probably one of the primary issues for me to back off of, getting called into workers to stay late. But we have to be able to recognize that otherwise that is a quick road to burnout. Ken, you had something earlier.
Yeah, we're kind of the topic of this was how do you get through your entire career, right? And look back with pride and honor and happiness on your service rather than disgruntled, angry, and frustrated. And I think a big part of that is the concept of normalcy. What I mean by that is being able to have a group of people, whether it's a mentor, a coworker who's a senior officer, someone who you trust in the organization, a coach, with what we do, who you can actually reach out to and say, I'm 7 years into this job and I'm just questioning whether this is for me or not. First thing I would tell that person is that's exactly what happened to me. And you need to understand that is normal for our career. At about 6 to 7 years, every officer I ever knew experienced some kind of negative impact on the vision of their career or their chosen profession or the department which they served that was so significant they started questioning whether they wanted to look at doing something else. That doesn't nullify the fact or dismiss the fact that you're going through that or experiencing it. But once you realize, hey, this is normal. This is what comes with our profession and the way our profession functions. It makes it easier to accept that, okay, I'm not weird. I'm not out of the normal here. I'm just experiencing what I'm supposed to be going through at this point in my career, right? And there are stages like that, I think, throughout an entire 20, 25, 30-year career that we all experience. But unless you can talk to someone who's been there, done that, and understand that, yeah, okay, what I'm going through right now, this is normal, right? You can apply it to an actual critical incident as well. It's not just the length of a career. Involved in an officer-involved shooting, and all of a sudden you can't get back in the car, right? Or you're going through the trauma of what comes with that is absolutely normal. You need to be able to talk to somebody about that and realize that, no, you're not losing your mind. You haven't lost your courage. You can still do this job, but you need to make the decision and actually work through this process and get back to that self-awareness where you can get back on the horse.
I love that you put the normalcy to that, because that's one of the biggest conversation topics that we have, especially with command staff, because they are short-staffed. They want to take care of the people that they have. There's not hundreds of people in the pipeline coming in anymore. For now, hopefully that shifts in the next couple of years. But how do you retain the people that you do have when that 7-year itch mark is coming up 3, 4, 5 years in, where a lot of people are like, "Ooh, I don't know if this is what I should be doing." And to have it be normal and lean into it instead of trying to resist it, because what you resist persists. So if you lean into it saying, this is normal, this is a growing pain, and it's not just in the law enforcement career, this is anything. There has relationships. That's why the 7-year itch, that's very common in marriage counseling as well. You get into that comfort zone or the routine of it, and the original excitement isn't there. And now you're kind of coming into a new phase. It's a growing pain. You're stretching. So you are in control. Like Shauna, you said, you don't have control of all of these external factors, but we do have control of how we perceive things. And how do we talk? Who do we talk to? I know we are all emphasizing normalizing talking. It's okay. The stigma is no longer there. The older generation is saying, hey, it's not sustainable to suck it up, buttercup. You need to talk. And the younger generation is really being preached to, you need to talk. So I think we're starting to make some progress there. But I really, really like the idea of leaning into the 7-year itch, understanding that that is normal wherever you are. And what are you going to do about it? So I can keep going, but does anybody else want to chime in on that note? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I'll go. So, I mean, as a wellness coordinator at a police department, I'm seeing it firsthand. The people that are coming into my office are literally the 4 to 8 year people. And I mean, it makes sense, right? They're not new anymore. They've been doing the job for a while. They're not experts at it. They know that. But they also see the bullshit too. And that could be pretty heavy. Like, whoa, I need to do that. I'm going to do this for 20 some more years. And, for them to even just come into my office and have that conversation, maybe that's the first time that they've talked to somebody, vented, whatever you want to call it. And the cool part about my position is now I'm able to follow up with them again. Just a simple text. Hey, how you doing? How's your week going? I heard your team had some tough calls. Have that conversation that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise. Because it's hard. I mean, departments have peer support. My old department, we have peer support. It was really good. It was very reactive. I'm just going to be honest. Most peer supports are. But trying to do that proactive work talking to a chaplain, talking to somebody that maybe that's neutral, and proactively using, I mean, most departments nowadays have some sort of therapy that's included, that's free. Again, we tend to wait till it gets really bad, where, as a wellness coordinator, we're trying to promote to do that proactively and to kind of help with those things when it gets really hard.
Chris,
Mike, you said something that was pretty interesting there. You said some people think I've got to put up with this for 20 years, right? We have to be careful not to think that far ahead, right? Because when we are living in the future, I get to retire in however many years it is, we're going to create this undue anxiety in us, right? So instead of just focusing on, I've got 13 more, let's just say we're at that 7-year itch mark. I've got 13 more years of this BS. If you word it like that, what do you have 13 years of? BS, right? So we have to be careful, number one, how we look at it. The other thing too is we can plan for the future. It's okay. We can say, I want to start on patrol. Then I want to go into investigations. What part of investigation? Well, I want to be a property crimes detective. I want to be an undercover detective. I want to be a homicide detective, whatever it might be. You can plan your career if you want for that 20 years, instead of just making a blanket statement, I've got to put up with 13 more years of this stuff, right? Because that is way different than, okay, I want to work patrol. I want to go become a property crimes detective. I want to be whatever type of detective. Then I want to promote. Then I want to become a sergeant. Then I want to become a lieutenant, then a commander, whatever it might be. All of a sudden, 20 years doesn't seem so far out there. It's going to go by quick because you're setting these goals for yourself. One of the things that helped me get through my career was every couple of years, 2 to 3 years, I'd feel stagnant in whatever position I was in, right? Now I got two options. I can stay in the position and feel stagnant and feel stuck, or I can do something about it. So what would I do? I would find another position that interested me in law enforcement. So I went from patrol. I went into to teach DARE of all things. And by the way, I didn't want to teach DARE, but nobody put in for it. And I was low man on the totem pole. So I was kind of voluntold to do it. Not realizing it at the time because I was a young cop. I didn't have kids. I didn't want to be in the school. I didn't even like kids, right? Because I wasn't a parent. So I'm like, why do I want to go into the school? But what I learned now when I think back on it, I was on the verge of burnout my first 2 years on patrol. Because again, I was volunteering for everything. I was staying late. I was eat, sleep, drink, whatever, police work. Then I went into DARE, and that removed me from the enforcement side of things. I was now hanging out with teachers. I was hanging out with normal people. We were actually doing book clubs every month, and that helped me disconnect from law enforcement. So what happened? I regained my balance. I was on the verge of burnout until I went into the DARE program, and it removed me from the enforcement side, right? And I didn't realize I regained my balance. I did 2 years in DARE, and then I went to patrol, and then I went into investigations. I went into narcotics. And I did 6 years in narcotics, and I loved every minute of it. But you're only allowed to do 5 years, right? So they had to cycle me out. I was able to squeak out a 6-year that last year in. But I would go into different positions throughout my career, and that prevented stagnation for me. So, and now, mind you, those smaller agencies, you might not have that, availability or option, but you got to ask yourself, if I'm feeling stagnant, what can I do to not feel this way, right? Because sometimes we feel like we're stuck in this. I have to do this job. And we were doing briefings for a very large agency here in Arizona, and we were with the night shift. We did a briefing on what coaching is, and talking, and this team from this large agency, they were so salty, and one guy was just so vocal and very negative about it. And they looked at it like, we have to be here, because if we're not here, we won't have a job, right? So they looked at it like, I've got to be there. And it's like, no, you have an option here. You can come to work, or you can quit and you can go do something else. You've always got that option. Nobody's put a gun to your head to be here. The fact that you're here tonight means you wanted to be here tonight. Nobody's forcing your hand here. And again, it comes back to perspective. I attended a training where we had a panel of war veterans, and they were all dealing with PTS. Some of them were missing limbs, and they were talking about, their experience. And they said, one guy goes, and he's pointing at all of us police officers. He goes, we here on the panel, we wish we were in your position. We would love to be police officers, but we can't, right? Because of the issues that they're dealing with. And when he said that, it shifted my whole perspective. Like, wow, there is somebody out there that wishes they were in my position, that wishes they were police officers. We've got that dream job that somebody out there wants. So once the shift is, you got to shift that perspective. You can focus on negative things, but that's all you're going to see in your career. We have to think about the positives. Sorry, I'm a bit long-winded. So,
well, and I know from your experience, so after you went from the detective or undercover work, you got thrown into IA, and at the time you absolutely hated it. But as we've seen, as we've gone through building this business and just life, the thing that you hated the most in your entire career is the one part of your career that's honestly served you the best. You learned so much, and it made you more professional. You have a better understanding of how things work. So my guidance to people that you're kind of disgruntled that you're in a position, maybe you were in a specialty and now you're back on patrol and you're just pissed off about it, or because you're short staffed, so you're getting pulled over to a different position, that it's not what you wanted. But sometimes we don't always get what we want, we get what we need. And if you shift the perspective, instead of I have to be here and this is bullshit, it's okay, what can I take away? And one of the things that we've learned, because technology is evolving so rapidly, it's actually good if you are in a specialty to go back out into patrol to try and see, hey, oh wow, shit's changed real quick from, Ken and Chris, from the time you guys started your career to now. If you guys went and got in a patrol car right now, how would you feel?
Wouldn't even consider it.
Well, what I learned, because between the different specialty units that I worked, I would go back to patrol for about a year, sometimes less than that, for a few months. And one thing I realized is if you're removed from patrol and you're in a specialty unit, when you go back to the streets, you lose your edge. At least for me, I felt that I lost my edge. My tactics were not the same as they were before, and that weighed on my mind. Like, hey, wait, am I scared? Right? And to the ego, it hits the ego. Like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm en route to a domestic violence call, and there's weapons involved. And now I'm back on patrol. I was in detectives for years. Can I do this? And that stuff starts to mess with you if you don't plan ahead. And for some agencies, when you go from a specialty unit, they say, oh, you got to go back to patrol. There's not I don't want to say an FTO grace period where you can ride with somebody. Sometimes they just put you in a uniform and you're in a patrol car. One day you're a detective, the next day you're a patrol officer, but you've been off the street for years. Departments need to realize you've got to gradually put them back into that position, because yes, we will lose our edge. And I've seen some SWAT cops that were in a specialty unit for a certain period of time. They would stress out when they had to fill in for patrol just for one shift. They would stress out. These are SWAT cops, right? You would think nothing scares these guys, but I recognized that when I would say they did not want to be on the streets, and I get it, because you've been removed, you've been in a specialty unit for a certain period of time. It is difficult to get back on the street sometimes. Well, for me, every time it was being removed. Candy, were you going to say something?
Just the story you shared with that 3 to 4 year getting disengaged with your assignment and finding the best way to resolve it was to move on to something else. And that was my career. I mirrored, right? And we've never shared that information before. So it's kind of nice to have that insight into you and realize, oh, okay, what I was going through was normal because other guys experience it too. The difference between us, though, was I wasn't burned out because I'd learned those lessons earlier that I didn't overinvest. My commitment and my dedication to the position I was in waned because I got bored with it. So I went from investigations into PIO because that's the only other job they would offer me. I didn't want it. I was not interested in it at all, but I knew I needed to change. Turned out to be the best assignment I had almost in my entire career. So again, recognizing the difference between burnout and the other causal factors that impact the mental approach to your happiness, I think is crucial.
And it's funny you mentioned that, Ken, because we've known each other, 2 or 3 years, and you never knew that about me. But it took us having a conversation about this to realize, hey, we're very similar in the experience, right? But again, it goes back to communicating and talking. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay if you feel a certain way, right? If you feel stagnant, if you feel like you've lost your edge, because I guarantee you there are other officers or other employees that feel the same way.
Shauna, I'm curious from the dispatch perspective. It's like you don't get to go to another assignment, right? So when you confronted that, how did you deal with that?
There's not as many options, but there are things that we really try to do to give that break, that reset. So, you can be a trainer, you can get on some special projects. We like to put together committees to work on things. Hey, we need to revamp this. Let's work on that. Just give people small. It's not a couple of year assignment generally, because not everybody wants to move up. Not everybody wants to take on being a supervisor or a training coordinator or a manager or a director. They don't want that. So there are lesser options in dispatch, but we've worked really hard to provide opportunities for it where we can. Okay, we're going to send you to training, and we're going to get you to be an SME in tactical dispatch, or let's send you to health and wellness training and you can work with our health and wellness committee. So one of the things we've done in our department is sit down with everybody and say, what are your interests? Inside, outside, whatever. And it's been interesting. I have a supervisor who told me he loved to do stats. And I did the happy dance because I don't love stats. So now he gets to do all the stats and make all these pretty charts and graphs, and he loves it. And that gave him a break from all the other stuff he has to do because he enjoys it. So we try to identify things that they enjoy and then put them in a position where they can utilize that. Not always as successfully, not always as long as of a break, but I also believe really strongly in giving people opportunities to learn and to grow in whatever area they can dip their foot into and dive into it. We have people who want to become an SME in our phone system. They're complicated pieces of equipment. If you want to dig into that, go for it, because I don't. So we just try to provide as many small opportunities as possible.
Well, and the other thing too of the self-awareness, because the culture within law enforcement is to promote. And sometimes that can be, if you don't want to promote, you're comfortable in your position, you're good on patrol, and that's all you want to do. Sometimes it can be looked at like, what's wrong with you? But having it's just like some people, they're very comfortable. They like their routine. They're happy. This is what works for them. So knowing like having that boundary, a lot of stuff comes down to having those healthy boundaries. And something I wanted to circle back to that when Chris was talking about, having those boundaries with command and letting them know, hey, I'm burning out. Hey, I'm overinvested. For command and anybody that's in a leadership role, not to get frustrated or upset with the person that's saying, hey, I have a boundary, but realizing if you have an officer that is saying yes, that they are reliable, they're showing up, they're doing the overtime, they're go, 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 that one may burn out and that might be like, I'm done. Those are the time that you're going to put in your letter. You're like, I can't do this anymore. You're out. Whereas if you have somebody coming to you saying, hey, no, I'm not going to be able to do this overtime. I need to put myself first because I'm not in a good place. Guess what? If you're okay with that and you support that as a command staff person, understanding you just saved the longevity of that person. It's better to have somebody take a couple days than to lose them for the next 15 years. My little 2 cents.
Well, and I'll just add to that because living that side of the house, you have to remember everybody else in your organization is going to see how you responded to that as well. Mm-hmm. And that speaks volumes. Actions speak louder than words. It's invaluable.
Yeah, and Shauna, when you send people to training, you see, a patrol officer, detective even, we have the thing that the good thing about that is we're in our office, which is a patrol car, and we can drive wherever we want. We don't have to interact with people unless, we answer a call for service. But for the most part, I can just roll my windows up and just drive around, for the majority of my shift until you send me to a call. But you in dispatch, you don't have that luxury. You have to work with everybody in a confined space for so many hours. So when you send people to training, that's a great way, one, to help them disengage from work, especially those week-long trainings. Those are the best ones, because for a week they can just go and be separated from the PD, but also you're working on their career development, right? They're learning something while they're gone. Do you, Shauna, when you send your people to training, do you have them come back and try to teach the rest of the team what they learned? Is that something? I know with my agency we used to do that.
So we don't make them teach, but we do ask them to bring back. There's a form that they have to fill out. What did their key takeaways and stuff. If they're comfortable teaching, we'll ask them to present something on it in a training or a team training or something. Sometimes they'll write up a blurb that they can share with the other people about what they've learned or their resources they found. So we're trying to implement that more, just so that it's not a one and done kind of a training thing. So yeah, we are working on that, but 100%. Dispatch is difficult because we cannot get away from the conflict that exists in the room. So you have to spend 12 hours with somebody you just had a fight with, or you have to spend 12 hours with somebody who was gossiping about you behind your back and saying things that were not true or were unkind. So these things, we try to limit them as much as possible, but they happen. We're humans, but we can't get away from them. They're at the next console, and I have to work with them. So that's something we have to address and try to mitigate as much as possible. And getting them out of the room is helpful because space creates healing.
And I want to just speak on it, and we'll do an entire segment on dispatch at some point, because one of the things, at least within the law enforcement profession, wellness is being talked about. We're starting to see a shift that, hey, you should be taken care of. Wellness is on the forefront of the conversation. But dispatch is, we always say, you guys are the first responders in first responders. Like, you're the first ones to deal with something, and you are the last ones to receive support, depending on the state. Some states are better than others. I know that in a few states recently, dispatch has taken a slap across the face because you're not recognized as first responders. You don't have support. You can't reach out to peer support. And there's been some people that have been quoted of saying that dispatchers aren't out there running into burning buildings or dodging bullets, so they don't count. And that mindset needs to shift. I'm going to call that one out, put that out into the social media world, because that's not okay. You guys need to have just as much support. And the fact that you guys are in there, you're hearing all of the negativity. You guys have to have an external outlet to be able to process, because some of that, the gossip, the drama, that is somebody, and it's hard not to take that personal when somebody's talking shit about you or doing self-sabotaging type behaviors, but that's a red flag of that person is overloaded with all of the crap that they've had to listen to. And instead of processing it healthy, it's now coming out as hurt people.
Right. And I think one of the things that's really grossly misunderstood in the public safety realm is whether you dispatch for police or fire or EMS or all of the above, it doesn't matter. We send an officer or a firefighter or a medic to a call, and they may go to 10, 12 calls in a shift. Busy shift, 25, 30. That dispatcher, in the time that you respond and handle that call, may take 15 or 20 other phone calls. Are they all emergencies? Hopefully not, but they can be. I mean, I know I've felt the frustration of giving CPR over the phone to an infant and they're not going to make it. And then you pick up the phone and somebody's yelling at you because where's that cop that I asked for an hour ago for my neighbor playing his music too loud? And you want to jump through the phone and strangle them because you just did CPR on an infant. So, and we never get that opportunity to physically release that adrenaline and that emotion. We're sitting in a chair, answering a phone, talking to people, taking in all that emotion, expressing it all isn't an option. So that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges we have is how do we mitigate that?
And that's a typical day for dispatch.
Mhm.
That's not even if there's an actual major event going. I know when the Lahaina fire broke out in Maui, it's a small island with a very small comm center, and that dispatch took over 4,000 calls in a matter of like 2 hours that day. And it's just, you guys need to, so this is me planting the seed. We are going to come back and have a big talk, just dispatch specific, because it needs to be addressed on a wider scale.
And call me, I can talk about this for hours.
Yes. Mike, we haven't heard from you for a little bit. Do you want to chime in with your 2 cents on anything?
Yeah, going back when we talked about going to training, I mean, I know budgets are always tough, and I just feel like nowadays we can't send people to training like we used to. But my last 10 years of my career, I was on peer support team, peer support coordinator, and I was able to go to a week-long local conference here. It was kind of a wellness conference. And man, like that was game changer for me. It just gave me that refresh. I got to hear awesome speakers. I got to be around other people doing peer support. And we forget, the peer support people sometimes need peer support, right?
Yeah.
We're help. And we forget about ourselves. And man, this conference was just awesome, just hearing all the different speakers. And it gave me that recharge, I think sometimes that we need. And that looks different for different people. But, one of the things I'm trying to encourage my new department is to, like, right now I'm sending our peer support people to the exact same conference. And they're like, whoa, we've never gone to that before, or I had to pay my own way. And no, we're going to thank you for your service, for being on the peer support team. Most peer supports, it's a collateral duty. You're doing it because you want to take care of your people, but we sometimes forget to take care of the people that are trying to take care of people. So sending someone to a conference, training, awesome training, like if you could do that, it could just help a lot. It helps people a lot.
Something that I've seen with the conferences, and it's so great that we do have the conferences and that, we have peer support and wellness teams and the people that are like in that energy. What I've seen is now it's kind of getting to a point where it's a lot of the peer support, it's the same people at these conferences. So what I would do is encourage the departments, send your peer support and wellness because they need that information, but also take a few of your non-wellness, non-peer support. Maybe your saltier people, maybe your people that are, showing some little red flags here and there, and send them with the other people to go to these conferences so that, one, it takes the pressure off of peer support, but it's also going to my thing is when we teach, we always know there's one person, even with this conversation, I don't care if there's, hundreds of people that watch, there's one person that's listening that needs to hear what we have to say. And when you go to a concert or a conference, there's one person that is in desperate need of being at that conference. So and I'm going to say for you, Mike, when you go to the next one, go grab somebody that you wouldn't have thought about and be like, hey, you're coming with me to this one.
I like that.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap this up, we had a really great conversation. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So let's just do a couple little takeaways for the audience. If you want to talk to maybe, the older generation, they're sitting there with retirement. What are some things that they can do to stay positive when they're watching the clock? I know we've had some classes that we taught where I'm like, who's getting ready to retire? And we've had people be like, literally pull up the clock and be like, minutes, like ready. So what kind of guidance do we have for the ones that are getting ready to transition out? And then for the ones that are at the beginning of their career and they're looking at like, this is a long road. What are some key takeaways that they can shift their mindset today to focus on that positive throughout it?
I'll start. I think really I'll go back to kind of the point that Chris made is don't focus on how many years you've got to go, focus on the year ahead and just make the most of that.
Perfect. Love it. Chris?
Me?
Yeah, sure.
Oh.
Just go.
Yeah, I mean, same thing along the lines. Don't look too far ahead. It's okay to plan ahead and plan what you want to do in this career, but enjoy today. Enjoy your career now, because trust me, 20 years will go by fast if you do it right and you don't focus too much on that future date. One of the things that my first day on, I was loading up my car at night, and a veteran senior officer goes, "You've got 20 years left, and I've got 3 years, 2 months, da da da," right? And I thought, man, I got 20. So he already put it in my head at the very beginning. I got 20 years. Whoa. So just be mindful of that. Don't think too far ahead. But even if it's just focus on the shift. I want to get through today's shift. I want to enjoy today. And if you do that, trust me, your career will go by fast. Mike, Shauna, what do you got?
I'll go. Yeah, just the retirement part, since I am retired. You can't plan everything, but you do need some sort of plan. So what happened with me is, a couple of my friends retired, a year or two before, and I was able to have those conversations. And, traveling is great, but you can only do that so much. Like, just remember, we're used to go and working. Like, have some sort of hobby, part-time job. Like, think about those things and some of you are like, well, I still have 5 years. Like, no, you could start planning that right now. And what do you want to do? I had a friend that always wanted to work at Costco when he retired, and that's where he's working, and he loves it. And so having those conversations, and I would usually pick out somebody, it's usually a friend or a buddy that retired a couple of years before you, because it's just really important to have those conversations.
And I agree. Being at the end of my career now and hopefully retiring soon, we'll see. I like my job too much, apparently. I love the idea that we need to find connection outside of our job and something to look forward to. But I've watched people hit the end of their career and just crater everything because they disconnect. And so that 30 years they put in becomes that last year when they just floundered. And then I've watched people who've said, I've got a year left and it's going to be the best. And I'm going to leave a mark. I'm going to leave a legacy. And they do something amazing. And so I think as you come to the end of your career, think about it. What is it that's important to you? What do you want to leave behind? And then work on that, work towards that. Spend your energy working on that. At the beginning of the career, do the same thing. How do I want to leave a legacy? What do I want to do in my home, my home life, my work life? What legacy do I want to leave? Is it that I was never home and I never laughed and I was just a grouch? Or is it that I intentionally made time for those that I care about? I stayed in contact with people outside of public safety, and I kept my head in reality and was able to maintain my sanity a little bit better that way. I think it has to be very intentional, whichever end of our career we're at.
Awesome. And my little takeaway, a lot of the people that I talk to, pretty much the majority that get into law enforcement or a first responder position is because they want to help other people. And then sometimes where they're like, this isn't for me, or this isn't what I thought it was going to be, is because you get inundated with the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the bullshit, and you don't feel like you're actually being of service and that you're actually helping. So shifting the perspective of like, you might not be helping the way that you thought you were going to, but I promise you, you are helping. Just for me, I know, like, if I get in an accident, as soon as you hear the sirens, you're like, okay, I'm okay now. So knowing, like, if you are showing up, you are not reactive, you're in a healthy, balanced place, you can shift the trajectory of somebody's worst day and make it, just be there as support and genuinely help them. And then my last little takeaway is coming from left field, but this just came to me. So the other thing to put things in perspective is to go to a rodeo and watch the bull riders. If you think law enforcement is a hard job, every time I go to a rodeo, because we're in Arizona and that's what we do here, you go and watch the bull riders. And I'm like, dude, for me, like, I would rather be working in law enforcement than to spend that much 10 seconds on a bull. Like, I wake up in the morning with my neck kinked if I don't sleep correctly on a pillow. There's no way that I could get thrown on and stomped on a bull. So, if you're thinking that your career is hard, go watch bull riders and be like, I don't want to necessarily do that. And then, puts it in perspective a little bit. It's my mic drop moment at the end of this call.
So what you're saying is every agency should invest in a mechanical bull
bull in the wellness.
And if you have officers that are burning out,
amazing.
go sit on this bull
Have them write it.
Well, but that's a liability. No. That's awesome.
Love it.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for being on the call. For anybody that's watching this, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. If you want to, work with one of the coaches, these guys are all available for sessions. And if you have topics that you would like to hear us discuss, or if you want to be a guest on this, by all means, reach out. And thank you all again for being here.